You see a red barrel, you know what's coming. This is one of the most pervasive tropes throughout gaming. An explosive hazard placed conveniently in every single world that you can imagine. It's always there when you need it. A bundle of fun to wreck and see explode. There doesn't even need to be an enemy there to give it a shot. The immediate reward of the boom is enough to make everything about the world feel right for just one glorious second. From its iconic spot in shooting games to its presence in role-playing games, this beloved and one of my personal favorite game elements has had a wide cultural impact for years. Welcome to UnlockLore, where we break down the storytelling patterns that shape your favorite games, movies, and stories. Today, we'll explore the origins, absurdity, and lasting impact of gaming's most favorite environmental hazard, the exploding barrel. To best understand why we choose to put obvious exploding barrels throughout video games, despite the fact that practically it would be dangerous to keep them around, let's take it back to the very start. Which game was the first one to throw an exploding barrel at us? Now, this is a hotly debated topic, and it boils down to how we categorize exploding barrels. Do we define them by their presence in shooting games, or do we define them by all the games and their various forms in which barrels take place? They're everywhere in gaming, but how they're used and why they're used varies greatly. So first, let's begin with the Trope Maker, the game from which most people think this particular beauty was born. Doom, 1993. Doom is a first-person shooter game published by id Software. For those not familiar, this particular game was the first ever installment of a still-growing series. In Doom, you take the role of a space marine, fighting your way through tons of undead humans and demons loose on the moons of Mars. You wade through this chaos and end the game in a literal hell after going through levels and defeating the final boss. This game has one of the first examples we can see of an exploding barrel that can be shot. Only, instead of the barrel being filled with fuel or oil, which would combust, Doom features a barrel full of nuclear waste, which also somehow explodes when shot. Terrifying. More than that, too, as one of the first original games credited with bringing this fantastic trope to the world, the barrels also aren't red, which is an everyday staple of what we now associate with things that go boom in games. The satisfying impact of the barrel exploding and the type of tactics this can bring to a firefight in Doom set the stage for these incredible explosions to come, and clearly show why it's such a valuable and unique trope to have, and just why so many games were inspired from it. But there's also a question of if Doom was really the first game to use exploding barrels, and it might not be. One of the contenders for the throne as a trope maker is none other than Donkey Kong, which was released in 1981 at the arcade. It's one of the earliest examples of platforming games and maybe even one of the most iconic games to ever be released, bringing us years of joy to come. As seen here, it's maybe one of the first ever exploding barrels in a game, though if it actually explodes is the question here. Is the idea of a barrel catching fire filled with oil really exploding? How about the barrels when they hit the bottom? Is that an explosion? The origins of a great gaming staple can be seen regardless, though here too, the barrel is not yet red. So if not Donkey Kong, then there's yet another arcade game that exploded onto the scene with flammable barrels. The name, Speed Rumbler from 1986. It is a game about 21st century America in a world where gangs go around attacking local towns because they want to commit crimes. I'm not kidding, the plot basically boils down to that. Listen, it was in the 1980s, it didn't need much more. So, this game revolves around a special forces soldier embarking on a mission to save people. Speed Rumbler features our wonderful barrels, which also explode after being hit, though they start to turn blue and only turn red after being hit. Again, not quite matching our modern day trope. Connecting to the historical root of this trope in games, we can see it kept popping up, even in the earliest days of gaming. But why? There are a couple of reasons this proliferates everywhere in the medium. First, barrels are easy to make. When creating sprites and early 3D models was still new, what's simpler to make than a barrel into which you can expand upon with explosion mechanics? Conceptually, this makes it an easy fruit to grab and throw into your game's shopping cart. The environment in which many games take place too also leads to barrels. You have an industrial area, it makes sense to include them. A game that revolves around the military, well, barrels bring supplies, ergo, having barrels in your game just also makes sense. It fits the aesthetics, it's easy to make, so it's no wonder that we keep seeing them. But the explosions aren't only just action. With them come the element of strategy and gameplay. They can be something to avoid, or they can be a tool to exploit, often potentially both at once, depending on how daring the player is. Because explosions mean action in the most literal sense, it's easy to trace their origins to action movies as well. 1993 brought us the gem in the form of Terminator 2: Judgment Day. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular classic, but I think most people are. But in it, there's a scene that I'll let speak for this trope and for itself.
I don't know how much longer I can hold this.
Now imagine you're a developer. You saw this, and you're making an action game. You've seen how cool it is in Terminator. How long do you think before you ask yourself, how can I program this wonderful gem into my game and make it just as cool? Inspiration in the creative world is freely traded, taken, and treasured. These Hollywood classics may be the reason why we can enjoy wonderful exploding barrels in our games even to this day. There are a lot of methods and ways that could have spawned this particular trope, but one thing is certain. Be it Doom, Donkey Kong, or even from Hollywood, exploding barrels are here to stay. But when we sit and think about it, do these excessively placed barrels being slung around everywhere really make sense? So the real question is, how common do we find explosive barrels just laying around? The answer is not as much as we're presented in the video game world. Sure, we might have things like fuel that might be put in a jerry can and left somewhere in case of an emergency. Chemical reactions do exist, but stored fuel in a big barrel, it's just not as common, or is it? Certainly it's not something that people would leave out in the open. Most chemically explosive barrels are labeled with the correct type of warning to give you a sense of danger that they present. This little pictogram here, if seen near a label or on a container, is your indication that things in there can explode with the wrong conditions. So be aware, show caution, and handle it with respect and care. There's also another label that we apply to things that we should keep an eye out for. This is the National Fire Protection Association's diamond, where the diamond in red indicates the level of flammability. If there's a 0 there, it's not flammable at all, and a 4 means that the contents are very flammable and will catch fire extremely easily. Now you might not think it, but really, you see this label pretty often. You go to the gas station, you're gonna see this guy, which is understandable, right? You walk by a building, it might be there. I've seen it outside of restaurants, on trucks, on containers. It's out there, everywhere, since it lets emergency responders make smart and safe decisions to save people. The thing is, though, if a place handles this kind of material, it's usually done in a safe way. and the contents are stored away according to safety procedures. So the idea of finding highly explosive barrels just laying around in the open while you eat and drink nearby, or among a bunch of demons roaming around on Mars, is up to you to decide if they belong or not, or even if it matters at all. You see a red barrel though, you know instinctively that shooting it in a game is going to lead to some fun or not so fun times. It's red for the same reason as the safety diamond. By giving it this color, we warn of danger. Humans are programmed to associate it with that emotion. Red is fire, red is blood, and red has the longest wavelength, making it easy to pick out and grab our attention. Our emotional associations with it make an excellent warning tool to draw the player's attention to our barrel. So we add these explosive barrels to games. Some games try to justify it by applying their own labels to these barrels and correlating it in a way which is explainable to the narrative of the game we're playing. We see things like hazardous waste, fuel supplies, and alien tech. Anything to justify it and suspend the disbelief of the player in order to give them awesome explosions. Other games, though, they don't pretend. They just acknowledge how cool it is and just let it be the way it is. Bulletstorm, for example, lets us kick barrels at enemies. Borderlands has so many types of barrels. Some that shock people, some that cover them in acid. There's always the good old fire barrel just laying around everywhere. Far Cry tosses them everywhere in enemy camps, whether or not it's realistic because it's cool. Explosive barrels, being such a wonderful trope, has evolved over the years, because not only do they give that visceral player satisfaction upon their explosion, but they also make themselves useful as a valuable mechanical tool in a game. One of the first mechanical tools that barrels can do in a video game is to teach us a very important lesson. Pay attention to the environment. By keeping a lookout for something that can offer us a massive advantage in a game, we're trained to keep our eyes peeled and always search for useful things, making it not just the barrels that we keep an eye out for. Positioning ourselves and our enemies can also lead to a whole nother level of depth in combat. This is particularly relevant in games that use some strategy, such as Baldur's Gate 3, which has multiple types of barrels that can explode, with each having an effect on combat. Oil, smoke powder, fire wine. These barrels tie into the ability to place them strategically before combat, position them during combat, or even use them in exploration. It can also be used as an obstacle, whose sole purpose is for you to avoid during travel. Especially in Baldur's Gate, however, the use of barrels is taken even further by giving us a degree of creativity in how we want to approach this mechanic and tool. One player might ignore it entirely. Another player might set up elaborate traps utilizing these to lure the enemy into and give them an advantageous position to make an otherwise extremely difficult fight into an easy one. Larian Studios' approach to this particular trope has a long-standing and wonderful history, given that they rely not just on explosive barrels, but elemental barrel types as well. They take this and they elevate the trope to an entirely new level, making it a cornerstone mechanic for certain play styles and giving us the agency to make as little or as much of the tool as we choose to do. These tools give us, the players, a lot of agency in these types of games as an element of experimentation. They also give us agency in a destructive, strategic, and even creative nature, which wraps all of these lovely different features into a single, implementable tool to gift and utilize. It also delivers organic moments of impact, giving us the feeling of cool that we love so much in video games. When you set up the right encounter and notice a clump of weak enemies near the barrel sitting vulnerably, and you take that shot, the resulting devastation to our enemies leaves us with a profound satisfaction that few other things can rival. It's no wonder that some games take this a step further, thinking past the simple implementation of an exploding barrel and trying to find other effects that can use the same system. Larian Studios is also known for this with their use in the Divinity Original Sins games, in addition to Baldur's Gate 3. There, we can find barrels for oil, death fog, and ooze. All of these variants function in a similar way with key differences, mirroring the same argument used by Borderlands. Why stop at a barrel with just fire and explosions when barrels can contain anything and everything? In the way to justify the inclusion of this mechanic, we also see that some variations of this trope just do it with a different shell to suspend our disbelief. Fallout, for example, has countless nuclear-powered cars, where, if we blow them up, they explode, and do so in a way that forms a satisfying mushroom cloud. Really, how far are these from just being an exploding barrel? Kingdom's Hearts even has a barrel spider enemy, which can be thrown at other enemies to stun them, transforming this wonderful tool into a physically present danger on the field and an enemy type. Some games like RimWorld allow us to store fuel in the form of chem fuel, which also has explosive properties when hit with gunfire set alight. In the context and hands of a creative or negligent player, we can actually bring this trope alive inside of our games ourselves, by either placing it in a strategic location, or if we're a particularly negligent player, by simply forgetting it in a warehouse and then watching tragedy unfold, bringing everything to an explosive and destructive end. It's no wonder, then, that both the ongoing and future use of explosive barrels have unlimited potential as we account for developer creativity and the already tried and true method of using our favorite video game trope. So there you have it, the exploding barrel, a fixture of gaming that's touched nearly every corner of the medium. From the nuclear waste barrels of doom to the elemental variations of Baldur's Gate 3, this simple mechanic has evolved far beyond its origins. What started as a convenient way to add explosions to early games has become a sophisticated tool for level design, player strategy, and those moments of pure satisfaction we all crave. It's a universal language in gaming. When you see a red barrel, you know exactly what to do with it. The beauty of exploding barrels lies in their perfect balance of absurdity and utility. Are they realistic? Not really. Would any sensible person store highly explosive materials in bright red containers scattered around combat zones? Absolutely not. But do they make games more fun? Without a doubt. They're the perfect metaphor for gaming itself, taking something that wouldn't make much sense in reality and transforming it into something that just feels right in the context of playing a game. That's the magic that keeps us coming back. So the next time you're playing a game and spot that iconic red barrel sitting there, just waiting for you, take a moment to appreciate this humble gaming tradition before you inevitably shoot it and watch the chaos unfold. Because let's be honest, you know you're going to. Please let me know down below some of your favorite uses for explosive barrels in games, and if you enjoyed deep diving into the explosive history of gaming's favorite environmental hazard and just want to see more stuff like this, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the tropes and mechanics that we all know and love. Until next time.